Welcome back to Behind the Play. My name is Alex Adams, and we have some kind of cool news because Behind the Play podcast got credentialed somehow for the Canadian men's national soccer team. So if people didn't know, I was there in the press box, talked to the players a little bit after the game, saw the coach and other players have some interesting post-game comments after Canada lost 4-4 on away goals to Jamaica, with giving up 3 goals in the second half after being up 1-0 in the game and 3-1 on aggregate. So I am joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Adam Iafrate, creates a Frates, who we've done a couple podcasts before, but this man knows this Canadian men's national soccer team. Well, a lot of soccer, a lot of Canadian soccer, but we both have strong opinions, but I think I should give you the floor. Just with the collapse last night at BMO Field, how big of a setback is this for the men's national team now that they aren't making the CONCACAF Nations League semifinals, but also not directly making the Copa America? Now they'll have to play Trinidad and Tobago in, I think it's Texas.
March, and in Texas.
March, yeah. To make the Copa America.
Yeah, the answer to the question will depend on what happens in March. We don't know the full extent of it now, but missing Copa America would be devastating. I don't even know if you could quantify how important it is that they make that tournament. So I guess to fully answer the question, we'll have to wait until then. And I still, have hope, and I would say even have confidence that they should be able to get the job done against Trinidad in a one-off. But missing the Nations League semifinals is a pretty big deal for a number of reasons. The first of which, obviously, is the most obvious. They don't have an opportunity at a trophy, and it's something we've wanted for a long time. With this particular group, we feel like they have the quality to compete with anyone in the region, and they certainly do have the quality to compete with anyone in the region on their day. And certainly not having an opportunity to even play for a trophy next summer is a big gut punch. Then beyond that, some of the more nuanced disappointments will be about just missing out on opportunities to play against the best in the region. It would have been looked like it would have been a matchup with the U.S. should they have gotten through. So not having a crucial match against the U.S. Would have been certainly very helpful. But also now it looks like next year they're going to have to qualify to the quarterfinal round of Nations League. So they're going to have to go through probably a group phase similar to what Jamaica had to do. And play against some smaller CONCACAF nations, as opposed to getting the direct qualification and maybe using those windows the way that they should have this year, really, with arranging certain friendlies against higher level opponents. So it's kind of like the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it? It's just like it's like gut punch after gut punch. There are a lot of downsides to what happened yesterday. I would argue that the biggest is the threat of missing Copa America, but it's certainly not the only. And even if they are to make Copa America, the loss yesterday is going to have, unfortunately, lasting ramifications.
And there's such a contrast with the game last night compared to about 18 months ago when Canada beat Jamaica in March 2022 to send themselves to the World Cup. And I know there's been, there was a tweet today by Sid Sixero that, got a lot of rise. And I just want to, because you mentioned about all these gut punches that the program, the players have really had. I think Arash Madani, I didn't overhear it, but heard a lot of swearing in the Canadian men's national team's locker room after the game. Just like, was making the World Cup a flash in the pan, or was it not the case where there is kind of real merit and that this program, even though they've been through so much turmoil and really lack of success since, are still going to be a pretty good program for the region and be maybe more successful in the World Cup than they were last time?
Yeah, no, I thought the take from Sid was off the mark completely. I think it was reactionary and it was emotional. And Sid, I'm sure, he's a great guy. I've actually met Sid, so I shouldn't say I'm sure. He is a great guy.
Yeah.
I've met him on a few occasions, but he's very opinionated and he's very emotional at times. And it was a tweet out of frustration, I'm sure. But I don't think, like, it's hard to look at the squad and and think there was anything fluky about what Canada did. I mean, they went into Central America and won. They went into basically every away destination
USA, Mexico,
and got results. And they took care of business at home, and clearly on talent alone of the squad. There's certainly a top four, and I would argue certainly even a top three nation in the region just on pure talent. So there was nothing fluky about getting there, and they did it in pretty convincing fashion. They were on track to have an undefeated qualification campaign, and they had a late slip up in a game where they had a red card for most of the match. And then, I mean, the final match, they had already qualified. I don't know how much they really put forward into that match against Panama, but you have what was very close, what was the closest in recent memory to a perfect qualification campaign. And so there's no way you can look at what they did. And even if you're looking at the program now, objectively, there are not three teams in the region more talented than Canada. I think Jamaica could kind of be close when they're at their best.
I was going to say.
But there still is, I think, a slight talent gap between even Canada and Jamaica. And then, you know, Panama, I think, punched but way above their weight, but talent, they're not quite at that level. And Costa Rica has kind of fallen off pretty significantly. So yeah, there's nothing fluky about it. I mean, if they had to qualify for the World Cup again in 2026, even if it was a 32 team format, you know, rather than a 48. I mean, the 48, I think they would have qualified quite easily. But if you're asking me if I think right now they'd qualify, you know, for 2026 if they had to go through World Cup qualifying, I would say absolutely. I still would bet on them to do it again. So I don't think it's accurate, and I think good times are around the corner. And that's just not, you know, I'm not even an overly optimistic person when it comes to sports. I mean, like everyone texts me throughout the game, like, "Oh man, we got this," and I'm just like, "Shut up, stop talking." You know, I'm one of those people, so I'm not an optimistic person at all. And you know this even from our interactions. Like, you know, say something positive, I'll be like, "Hey, man, it's too early."
So, that's the Leafs being ingrained.
It's the
and
Leafs,
Blue Jays a little bit
Canada
too.
Soccer, it's everything, man. The Raptors up until 2019, it was the same thing. So it's just a lot of I've seen it too many times, and I don't like to get myself into the emotional headspace of a win until the win is like for sure, until it's for certain. So even yesterday, I was scared, and I always think of what could go wrong. What is the scenario, and how can it go poorly? You know, and coming into the match, and this is where I think we were a bit naive. I wanted to get into this at some point today.
Yeah, go
Maybe
for
I'll do it now. I think we were naive in the World Cup in 2022 in that we knew we had quality and we knew we could play, but maybe we didn't fully give the teams we were playing credit for the quality they had.
Just ask Croatia.
Yeah, to flip the game on its head and you know, in one moment, or Belgium. You know, I think we outplayed them for legitimately 75% of the match, and they had one moment and they capitalized. And so like there's a certain level of quality that those teams have that if you can't switch off for 5 seconds in a match. And we switched off multiple times across the two legs. And the first goal, you think about the first leg, we switch off for, you know, 5 seconds on a free kick. We could argue if the free kick should have been allowed to be taken and yada yada yada. It doesn't really matter at this point. It was allowed to be taken. It's CONCACAF. That stuff happens in this region. We should know that better than anybody. And they score because we switched off. You know, and then you think about this 10-minute stretch where we concede 2 goals in 5 minutes, and generally even before that, sloppiness for 5 minutes. Probably should have conceded before either of the 2 goals were scored. And it's just a moment where we switch off, and there was some naivety after allowing the first goal, where, you know, on the second goal, Ismail Kone loses the ball high up the pitch, but everyone in a Canada shirt is high up the pitch. Like we had 8 of our 11 players were caught high up the pitch. And it was Derek Cornelius and Kamal Miller left to defend a 4-on-2. So you can't put yourself, I mean, like, you have to understand the situation. At a certain point, you have to recognize coming into this match, we didn't need to win. We actually didn't even need a result. If we just didn't concede 2 goals, we were through. That was the calculus. If you don't concede 2 goals, there's 0% chance you don't make it. So coming into a match, I'm not saying bunker, I'm not saying, you know, absorb pressure, anything like that, but have a defensive responsibility the entire 90 minutes just to ensure you don't allow 2 goals, because the job is done. If you leave the match allowing 1 goal or a shutout, obviously you're through. So that would have been my focus and my priority, is like, when we need to get guys behind the ball, we need to get guys behind the ball, especially 10 seconds after, you know, conceding a goal, not literally, but it felt like it. We certainly can't push 9 bodies up the pitch and get caught on a counter immediately after. Like, that's just irresponsible. I don't know who that falls on, but it's the same naivety that we saw, unfortunately, in Qatar. It's like, not like we didn't play a decent game, not like we didn't create chances. I mean, the game could have been 4-0 at half, let's be real. But you have these moments of this 10-minute stretch, and just like it was in the first match with the free kick goal, where Shamar Nicholson's played through. What do we do? How are we allowing ourselves mentally to switch off, or are we just not giving our opponents enough of credit, and we don't think that they can hurt us? Because clearly they can.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting because what I think about is how Canada conceded the least amount of goals in the qualifying run. And I mean, I think James Sharman had a funny tweet yesterday where it's like, what does Canada need? And the poll was center back, center back, center back. And I mean, in the game on yesterday, I wouldn't really say that the center backs were particularly poor. I wouldn't say they were particularly great, but on the two goals that they were beat by, it wasn't the defenders, and then one's a penalty off a handball. It wasn't even like a tackle or anything like that out of position. But that's the thing with this team, is that they had that continuity. They had the ability to, be the sum of their parts rather than, be fragmented into all their parts as individuals. And I really noticed that now with the team is, I mean, Davies has all these amazing runs, but never really finds it the right ball, the right teammate. Even though he had a goal and an assist, I actually felt he, gave a lot back that he could have, had 2 goals and 2 assists. Honestly, he created that much, but just didn't really see the right players, and it was very individualistic. I'd say, I'm not saying he was trying to be selfish, but trying to maybe do too much, right? And that's when you don't have a game plan in place that allows you to be a team. And Stephanie Huzakio gives up the ball, and it probably was a foul, but at the same time, it's he had an outlet, and why are you being dangerous, as you mentioned, and just not being smart? And Borjan said it, Kay said it, just they lost their nerve, and we didn't see this team lose their nerve before the World Cup, and ever since, it's really, sometimes you have this elite confidence and everything was going well, and then adversity hits, and they really haven't shown it since the World Cup.
But I also think it comes down to, like, when did we stop respecting our opponents that way? Because at the beginning of World Cup qualifying, we certainly did. And I think you've even seen a shift in, I mean, Canadian, all other Canadian fans will say this. I totally agree with your assessment of Davies doing too much, like 80% of the time. Sometimes he's so talented that it works, right? Yeah. And he's so dynamic that it works. But there's so many times you're just like, play quick, like just play quick. Everyone else is touching out. You're constantly, the ball's moving. The ball's always going to move faster than any player. Even Alphonso Davies, maybe the fastest player on the planet. The ball always moves faster. So quick decisions, trust your teammates, ball comes to your feet, one touch and out. That's how you got to play football. And use your pace to get on the end of a ball, right? Rather than trying to take a guy on one-on-one or 1-on-2 or 1-on-3, which you see so many times. It feels like it's something that we didn't see early in World Cup qualifying, because early in World Cup qualifying, I think Canada was more scared to be hurt. I think they were scared to lose. I think they respected their opponents at a different level. I think they looked at their opponents and saw all the ways that they could hurt them. Now, I think Davies overestimates, like he just thinks it's easy, frankly. He thinks it's going to be too easy. And you notice, because he doesn't do that when he plays for Bayern.
Yeah. What's interesting is he also missed like half of the World Cup qualifying cycle.
He did. And don't get me wrong, I still think we're a better player with Davies. I'm not
like Canada's best
we're better with
performances were with Davies in a lot of ways. Like, just
yes. And the game breaking ability he has is something that nobody else in the region has. And so I would not trade that on my team for anything. But I do think you need to figure out how to harness that in a way where it's more like you're kind of respecting the game, the team aspect of the game a little bit more, and your opponent. Because I think the early Alphonso Davies with Canada did that really, really well. He knew when to pick his spots and his moments, and he knew, when to really to trust his teammates and to hit Jonathan David with a pass and then try to make a run. And you don't have to have the ball at your feet to be a dynamic creator. You can create with your legs. His speed is so game breaking that he can make runs that open up everything for your attack. So I think he tries to do a lot now. And I think part of that is, again, maybe they just don't look at Jamaica and think that this is a team that really scares us. Because if you watch Davies in the Bundesliga, he does not play that way at all. He plays quick. If anything, I would argue he plays too conservatively for his abilities. Like he could do probably more than he shows with Bayern, but because he's at Bayern, he kind of recognizes like, hey, I don't run the show here. And and he's a left back, right? You don't want to get caught in that position, out of position. So I think his philosophy is not necessarily perfect with Bayern. I would love to see him be a little bit more aggressive and assert himself a bit more on those matches. But with Canada, it's like the total opposite. He tries to do it. He tries to make up for what he doesn't do with Bayern when he plays with Canada, and he just wants to do everything. And so, yeah, trust your teammates, move the ball quicker. But I think it's just part of respecting your opponent, because he knows that the way to win is not that. It's not trying to take guys 1-on-3.
Yeah.
That's not what they teach you at any level of football. It's not a successful strategy.
Yeah, no, and I just keep thinking about the difference between, even though obviously the team didn't do well in Qatar, but just John Herdman is just such a massive hole that this program needs to figure out. I have a feeling that Mauro Biello is probably not the long-term plan. I know for you have strong opinions on that, and I don't think you're a big fan, but and I wouldn't really blame him on this result purely on him. I don't think, like, it was more bad kind of individual mistakes rather than they kept getting beat down the right, one flank or set pieces. Obviously turned off for the goal against Jamaica, but I don't think, I don't know. I find that hard to blame the coach all the time for those.
I agree. I was saying that in the space yesterday. I was, everyone was calling for Biello's head, and I'm like, guys, like, okay, were some of the decisions late in the match, the subs, were they the subs
The
I would have gone
subs.
with? No. Right? Do I think maybe the setup was a bit naive? Do I think maybe after we concede the first goal, like maybe there's a quick discussion, or even at halftime? Like I said, you don't concede 2 goals, you're through. Maybe the discussion at halftime needs to be different than what it was, because obviously we didn't come into the second half looking like we had the right game plan. So, I don't want to let him off the hook completely, but I will say, like, there needs to be accountability on the players. There needs to be accountability on the 11 guys actually on the pitch who are making decisions and making the mistakes. And really, you shouldn't be looking at an interim manager for like your entire strategy for the match. They knew what result they needed. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need a manager to tell you, hey guys, it's really important we don't concede here. Like, a 5 minutes after we've conceded, it's really important that we don't push
turn
9 bodies up the pitch and let them hit us on a 4-on-2 where they're going to expose our pace. Like that should not need to be said to your team. So I can only assign so much of the blame to Biello. And in terms of Biello, I actually have nothing against the guy as a person, as a manager. Seems like a great person. I'm sure as a manager, he has his quirks like any other manager. He has his strengths and weaknesses. For me, it's just about, I think the program needs to go in a direction with a reputable name who the players immediately are going to come in and respect, and a new, fresh voice. He's a familiar voice. He's somebody who's been around. Who they already have relationships with. I think you need kind of a fresh set of eyes looking at the entire player pool, reevaluating it the way Herdman did in 2019 when we kind of assembled the team that would end up taking us to the World Cup. He had a big camp and he just trialed a bunch of guys and tried guys even in different roles and experimented and figured out what he had. And he did that to create his tactical identity. We don't have a tactical identity right now that's any different, really, because, to Biello's defense, he hasn't really had time to build that. But I also don't think it's advantageous to have a guy who's been in the system, who's a kind of an old voice who people they already know. They already kind of know his style and the way he works. You kind of need a fresh voice to come in and shake things up. So that's the main reason why I want them to hire a manager, not because, I think Biello's horrible person or whatever, or he doesn't know what he's doing.
It's
more about it's got to be a fresh voice. It's got to be somebody with a reputation who the players can look up to, and like, trust his game plan.
Yeah, and to be fair to like kind of critiques, like, he hasn't had this outstanding career, and it's been then with Canada, and even John Herdman had way more success becoming the men's coach, even though you could say, oh, it was the women's game. I still think it's the same game at the end of the day, just different genders or sexes. But what do you think, like, how important is that next hire for this program heading into 2026? Like, for me, it's almost the biggest, outside of maybe making Copa America, just because of the experiences that you need the players to get into. Outside of that, which is basically your World Cup qualifying tournament in some ways, Copa America, how important is getting another coach that really pushes this program forward?
It's everything, right? It's hugely important. The next hire needs to be, and this is why I don't have a problem with the process, going to a third party, taking your time, because the next hire needs to be the manager who you think is taking you into 2026. None of this, short-term planning, who's going to get us to Copa America, no, you need to build a tactical identity, which takes time. And you need to evaluate the player pool from scratch. And I think obviously there's like 7-8 guys who you're pretty sure are locks going forward, but you still need to reevaluate the entire player pool, and you need to figure out how to fill the rest of the pieces for your 2026 roster. So I think a fresh set of eyes is very important, and I think you want it to be somebody who the players have some sort of knowledge of. They don't need to have a relationship with. I actually think maybe better if they don't have a relationship with, but somebody who is a name that they might recognize, or somebody who they immediately will see as a credible voice. I think it's everything. Like I said, if Canada ends up hiring a manager who doesn't have any pedigree at all, and ends up, I think this is kind of the trajectory we're on right now. I think what you're seeing right now is kind of where we're heading. It's going to be a mixed bag in CONCACAF, where there's enough talent that you're going to be able to beat most teams, but you're going to get caught every once in a while because there are teams that are close to the level of Canada, which is, Jamaica, Panama. I think those teams could definitely beat Canada, as we just saw, and Costa Rica even. And I think those are the types of teams that might catch Canada. Don't mind my dog. There's nothing I can do about this. But yeah, I think those are the teams that potentially could catch Canada if they're not organized and they don't have, maybe the correct players to complete the puzzle.
Yeah, and just going to the World Cup, right? I don't think losing every single game will be at all, not just making the World Cup, but successfully, I think the minimum is winning a game at the World Cup. Closer to that probably will be making out of the group, especially with 48 teams. Obviously, the pool should be, lower bars to entry. I don't think they'll probably have a group like Croatia and Morocco, two teams that make the semifinals, and then Belgium, who was, I think, number 1 in the world or number 2 in the world at the time that they played them at the World Cup. Although I don't think that, obviously, they went out early. So, but at the same time, it's really, you talk about tactical identity, but it's growing the program to a place where Canada, with all the talent that they have now, everyone says it's the most talented roster ever, but we need to make it not just add to that talent, add to the player pool, grow players within the system like John Herdman did in so many ways. And then at the same time, not just have a lot of good parts, but let them work together and be really successful, because I don't think there's any real answers at the back right now, at least not in the next year or two, maybe by 2026. Luke, I can't say his last name. Fougerolles. I saw him after the game, actually. But
was he sad? Did he look depressed?
No, he just looked lost in the BMO lobby. I would say that was it.
Okay.
But
poor kid, man.
Yeah, but for him, just, he's a defender. They don't have too many coming up, but just growing the pool, because if you look at this team, there's, as you said, 6, 7, 8 guys that are going to probably be there for Canada starting or have a big role in 2026. But then it falls off pretty dramatically, right? The depth in this team is better than it's ever been. At the same time, it's not nearly what it could be compared to just the starters, right? Like, it is a big drop off. Like, if Eustachio goes off, you have no one even close to him. Even Kone goes off, you have no one even close to him. David, not really that many players that are maybe not comparable, but even closer to them. So
the top end talent is on a different level. That's for sure. And they haven't been able to. The last player they've added to that, top end group would be Ismail Kone, and they haven't had any luck since then really finding another player who's of that importance since that. And it was kind of a process of discovering, right? It's like, Stefan Eustachio, really good. Kyle Aaron scores a lot of goals. Jonathan David and Davies, obviously people knew. Taylor Buchanan was a revelation. Alistair Johnston, like all of these guys kind of had their moment where they came and emerged. And that happened really rapidly. And then suddenly it was like, okay, well, who's next? Kone came up, and then that was about it. So I think we're looking for that. Who's going to be the next like walk-in starter guy you can't leave off the team sheet who emerges? Is it somebody who's been called before who hasn't really had an opportunity, or is it somebody who we haven't even mentioned yet?
For me, I have one, and it's not really a young player per se, but I think we're time's done for Milan Borjan. I'm in last night. I wouldn't say he was really at fault. Maybe the second goal, you could blame him a little bit. But again, none of them are a blunder or that should be saved. It was more, oh, maybe he could have, and
Yeah.
then one's a penalty. But more just for Dwayne St. Clair is just not Dwayne. Yeah, Dwayne St. Clair is just way better at the back. Max Crepeau is obviously coming off injury. One, they're just better tactically for this team because they get, with poor defenders and a poor keeper at distributing the ball, it makes it much harder to break out and really just get on the attack and just not put yourself in bad positions in your own half, right? And you see that time and time again. Look at Stefan Eustáquio losing the ball. If you have a better goalie to distribute, maybe he doesn't have to make that decision in the middle of the park, right? Or near. So, and just shot stopping too. I think those goalies are probably better than Borjan right now. So that's one. Now for the defense and a young player, there's a lot of guys, Ali Ahmed. There's a lot of players kind of there, but none that seem kind of obvious other than Matthew Choinière, who I know you want on this team, but I don't know if he'd start all the time. It's more just be in the squad and maybe play a little bit of a role.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't think there's anybody who's emerged at that level where it's like, so the talent is so undeniable that you're like, they need to be on the pitch. But there are guys who I would have had here, and Matthew Choinière is of course one of them, and Ali Ahmed, I would have loved to see him get some minutes over these two legs. I think, maybe especially late in a match when we were kind of trying to pick a lock, trying to figure out how we can break down Jamaica sitting behind the ball. I think Ahmed's the type of guy who has a little bit of class, and he could maybe figure out how to create, put a good ball in the box, or to maybe dribble past the defender and draw a foul, or something that they just were lacking in the final few minutes. But again, I agree with you in the sense that I don't know if there's anybody that's super obvious who's like being denied an opportunity. I think Choinière is the closest thing. That's like, I'm suspicious that he was injured, but apparently I've heard he was not injured. I've heard it was a decision about CF Montreal's form. But then you think like Samuel Piette is on the same team and he got a call, right? And you have TFC players like, Jonathan Osorio hasn't played a meaningful game because TFC's been so far out of the playoff picture, and their season's been done for even longer. So it's like, I don't know how we can, if that's the argument, I don't know how we can really justify the argument. So definitely squad decisions were something that are going to continue to be criticized, as they kind of should,
And to go back to Herman, like he was so hands-on with the development programs, with finding players like Ismail Kone, which just found played a couple games for CF Montreal, and then he's on the national team, and then he's playing against, I think it was Panama. I could be mistaken, but
Costa Rica, I think was
Costa Rica, debut. Costa Rica, and then he played against Panama. But my point being is that Herdman took those chances. He saw the talent and inserted them into the lineup. And with Mauro Biello, just he hasn't done that with anyone. It's been super safe, and that's okay. But at the same time, I think going forward, this team, especially when it gets to Copa America, when it might be going within the minnows and CONCACAF to make the Nations League quarterfinals, they need to bring up younger players and try them out, because it doesn't make sense right now. Your whole goal is to make 2026 as good of a performance as possible. Obviously make Copa America. I think you can be safe for that one game, but outside of that one game against Trinidad, this team really needs to start finding players and really taking chances in the games that they're playing to use young players, because right now the pipeline really seems to be drying up, and that just cannot be the case. Even if it's one or two players, that makes a huge difference. So that's
it
something.
does. You saw that. I mean, if you find a player who possesses a certain skill set or certain qualities, it changes an entire team. Stefan Eustáquio, you take him out of the team, very different.
Just think about how he was found. Like he was born in Canada, lived in Portugal, I think for a majority of his life.
I think he moved at 15. So he was actually, I think it was probably more in Canada, but still, he did move to Portugal and then represented Portugal.
He represented Portugal, and like John Herdman convinced him to come to Canada. And like, we need more of those. Tamori is always someone that I'm just going to, cry about in my sleep when I think about the national team. But just finding those kind of gems, which we really haven't found. I guess Luc de Fougerolles, did I say that right? Good. There's my French. But just more players like that. Obviously, Luca Koleosho. I don't know if that's gonna come about, but just those kind of players that are dual nationals, bringing them in, trying them out, trying to get more players come to this team. And at the same time, with a home World Cup, there's a lot of incentives for people wanting to play for Canada. And then you get to play with Alphonso Davies, Jonathan David, list goes on and on. So yeah, I just do worry till we have a solution at manager, and really just what is next for this team, because it really feels like it's kind of stagnated significantly since the World Cup.
I mean, I can't argue it. It's frustrating, and it's a frustrating reality. I don't know how much of it falls on Biello, even, because I think it's an unfair situation that, like, everyone was saying, oh, why didn't we call so and so, all these young players, that we had in previous camps. And while I'd love to see young players, I also think, like, these were kind of must-win matches,
Yeah.
and it wasn't really the time to experiment. And I've beat this horse to death by now, but the Gold Cup was the time, and there were so many obvious selections that didn't happen, unfortunately, and so many young players who were on pretty good form who either didn't get called or didn't play when they got called. They got called, and they just kind of, the minutes were really, really
Yeah.
scarce. So that is difficult to reconcile, especially when late in the match, you're looking for answers, and we had already subbed out a lot of our talented players. So a lot of our go-to guys like Buchanan and Laren had been subbed out, and Eustachio they were taking out, which I still disagree with, but that I'm not going to get too deep into that. But a lot of these really important players are out of the match or coming out of the match, and we need a presence in the box, and we bring on young Jason Russell-Rowe, and I think it's such an unfair situation for him to put him in a situation like that, to throw him into the fire like that, when you had all Gold Cup to really give him confidence and get him these important minutes that you would, you knew were going to be valuable for him, because at some point you're going to need to throw him in a situation like that. But it would have been much better if he had that Gold Cup experience, bagged maybe a couple goals and had confidence right in the Maple Leaf, and then you throw him in the 88th minute with 10 minutes of stoppage time and you see what he can do, rather than it felt like it still feels like I've never seen him play for Canada, because his minutes have been so few and far between and so late in matches. It's like I don't know what he is with the national team yet. I don't know if he knows what he is with the national team yet. I don't know if he knows where he fits in. So that was a missed opportunity in the Gold Cup. It was a missed opportunity again playing against Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, you have to balance the results and the importance and need of getting results with integrating young players. Otherwise, you find yourself where so many national teams have been in the past, in this graveyard somewhere between generations, where they're trying to figure out, how do we maximize our results, but also recognize that our team is aging out and we have nobody who's at the level to replace them. So when guys like Steven Vittoria retire and we have not groomed a replacement for Steven Vittoria, that's a problem. We have to play important matches following that. And for the 2026 World Cup, Steven Vittoria is not going to be there to save the day. And frankly, as fans, we probably shouldn't want him to have to be there to save the day, because we probably shouldn't be starting. He's already kind of fallen out of form in his club situation in Portugal. We shouldn't be starting a 38-year-old center back in the World Cup. Like, I just think we need to be preparing these contingency plans, if you want to call them that, 4 years in advance. And for me, if it was just purely up to me, the second we lose in Qatar, the second we're officially eliminated after the third match, is when I start thinking, okay, I have my 7, 8 guys who I feel like are going to be here for sure in 2026.
Yeah.
And then I have another group of maybe 6 guys who I'm like pretty sure will still have enough juice to give me something valuable in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
That's my core. That's the team I'm building around. My job for the next 4 years is figuring out where I'm finding the other 8 guys who are on the plane, or whatever the number is, right? Whatever number, you do the calculus and you're left with, how many guys are we short? How many guys are going to either age out, or the quality is not going to be where it needs to be, right? Like a Daniil Henry situation. He didn't age out necessarily, but he just wasn't at the quality that we needed for where we were going. So it's like, how many guys fit into those 2 boxes? And whatever that number is, that's how many guys you got to figure out how to replace. However you do that, whether it's by inviting them into your camps just to get them a feel for the national team, maybe it's integrating promising youth players, maybe it's having Camp Poutine and just having a full player assessment camp. You call in a bunch of young guys, you call in do Merci Michel, you call in Simon Collin, you call in a whole bunch of guys who we haven't had any looks with the national team, whether they're Lucas Diaz, and you just kind of see where they're at. You got to feel you first of all, you're keeping in touch with them, and you're making them, understand that they're still very much part of the picture, which is valuable. But also, you kind of can understand what qualities they bring, and you can groom guys for roles. And this idea that you if you're so young, you how can we give you an opportunity as a serious national team? But I would just respond with the Ismail Kone situation. Like, how many he had, like 5 professional games, and he was on the national team, right? Because if you're good enough, you're old enough, and it might be the case for Luc de Fougerolles too. I'm not saying he should have started in these matches against Jamaica,
No,
but I certainly think you need to get him involved at some point in the near future, because I think, again, it's the same situation. If he's good enough to start matches in the Carabao Cup for Fulham, just based on level alone of where he's playing, that would make him our best center back. And we have to recognize that, and so, and he's 18. So we have to recognize the value of a prospect like that. And we can't just let him kind of sit and rot. We have to figure out, how do we groom this guy? Because in 2026, we're going to need that dude to not just be on the team, but we're going to need him to be a dude. He's going to have to be a guy who carries a big weight. He might have to be our star center back. He might have to be the number one guy. At this rate, he probably will have to be the number one guy, unless somebody else emerges that I'm unaware of. So you need to be thinking kind of 3 years ahead, 4 years ahead when it comes to these cycles. Look at the entire cycle in its totality. And a manager is a big part of that role. Maybe they didn't anticipate they were going to lose Herdman. I think that's the case. I don't think that they had plans to losing Herdman. People said, "Oh, why wouldn't you have a contingency plan?" You can't really have a contingency plan. Other managers are in other jobs.
Unless it's like, I'm gonna retire after 2026. Which, like, if they expected him to be there for 4 more cycles, then I blame them. But I don't think that's really the case here. I want to go off that just a little bit, what you said, because I want to put a little bit of glass half full for this, because you talk about just the players heading into 2026, and the thing with 2022, and maybe going back to Sid Sixero's tweet, but this team's so young in a lot of ways. Jonathan David's 23. Alphonso Davies, I don't even know if he's 23 yet. Tajon Buchanan's maybe 24. Even Eustachio is, more like 28, but the core of this team is young. Ismail Kone is only 21. So the future going into 2026 is all these young players that had the taste in Qatar are going to be even more so in their prime, even more so, presumably better, but also more experienced, understand these moments, been in those moments before. And so in a lot of ways, sure, it's been disappointing, but if you looked at this team in 2018, when John Herdman took over, and you said, okay, now you know the whole history, we make the World Cup, then we go through this slide, and we're barely losing to Jamaica when we probably should have. Things didn't go our way. Still probably a very good chance at going to Copa America. One of the 2 or 3, maybe the 3 or 4 best teams in the region. You'd say, whoa, what the heck? This is awesome. And all our players are essentially under 25 that will be stalwarts going into a home World Cup. You'd be like, wow, that's amazing. What happened? What changed? I know Alphonso Davies and no one else. And I just mean, it feels so doom and gloom because everything came so rapidly, right? The World Cup came so unexpectedly. And then we're thinking, oh, Belgium, that's an easy win. They suck, right? And Croatia, they're not that good. They're old, right? And then we play the US and we lose 2-0. And it's like the sky is falling. And that US team is probably the most talented US national team ever assembled. Maybe not the best in terms of a team, but talent-wise is incredible. So we're becoming a soccer nation. That's why we're on these discussions right now and criticizing, critiquing, because in even 5-10 years ago, no one was doing that, right? Or not that many people, sorry. It's just
everything you said is right. Everything you said is right. It's you have to have perspective sometimes, and I still do that. And even yesterday, like I had to kind of have a moment. I was obviously pretty upset. I had a moment where it was like, hey, like, we're going to the 2026 World Cup. We still have a very realistic chance of going to Copa America. Like, it could be worse. And I've been a fan where it's been much, much worse, and I think it's
this isn't 8-1. This isn't 8-1.
I think Matthew Shinetti tweeted this, and I hope I'm not wrong, because I don't want to misquote him, but I believe it was Shinetti. He does great work, by the way. he said something like, but the standards have changed, or maybe it was Arash. I'm not sure, but somebody
Rash
said
would say
something
that. I know
something
that.
along the lines of, but what you're saying, and this, whether it was Shanetti or Arash, it was like, but the standards have changed, and we have to change our expectations along with it. And I couldn't agree more. The standards have changed, but I think it's a good reminder that like growth, the trajectory of growth it's not linear. Like nothing actually in life really happens that way. Things happen over a prolonged period of time, and there's ups and downs within that. But to pretend that we're in a worse situation or even a comparable situation to what we were just even 3 or 4 years ago would be lying to ourselves.
Uh,
This program, by qualifying for the 2022 World Cup, changed forever because the expectations changed forever, and the quality on the pitch has been better. Like the quality on the pitch 5 years ago was not in the same stratosphere as even what
no.
we saw last night in a losing effort to Jamaica.
Yeah.
So
What does
we do have to recognize that, and that needs to be, part of this equation that we factor in. It doesn't make the loss yesterday acceptable. Doesn't make it something we should be proud about. But we do need to recognize that this path we're on is kind of a long, tumultuous path. It's not going to be a linear. We completely climb the FIFA rankings all the way from 120th to 15, where we stay for the next decade. Like that was never how it was going to work out. Also, one more thing, because I just remembered this. I remember before Canada rose in the FIFA rankings, there was a poll that Canada Soccer put out, and it was asking fans, what would be your goal be in terms of FIFA Coca-Cola ranking by 2026? What should our goal be as an organization? Where would you like to see this team? And I remember putting top 35 in the world, because I figured like fringe World Cup caliber team. This was before Canada's big ascension. And it's funny that within a year of putting that poll out, they had reached that goal. They'd gotten to 35 in the world, right in and around that area.
Yeah, I think it was
37,
33.
yeah,
Yeah, I forget.
33. I don't know
Yeah.
what number it was, but they had basically reached the goal that I had set out for where I wanted them to be. At this time, it was like 5 or 6 years down the road, 2026. And then, within a year, basically, they had reached that goal. They jumped from 80 to 35 or whatever. So it just goes to show you, like, that was a blur, but that's not sustainable. Like, to do that, it takes time. And do I think they'll be top 35 by 2026? I think it's very, very possible, very likely. I think
They
that you're
make
going to
Copa
see ebbs and
America.
flows, right? You're going to see ebbs and flows though in that. Like they dropped at one point, they were back down to behind 50, and now they're back above 50. But now they lost to Jamaica. They might be,
I mean, they
right
won
around
and
50
lost
again.
to Jamaica, right? So
Yeah, but the win will not give them as many points as the loss just because of FIFA ranking. But again, needless
yeah,
to
no,
say, it's
I
not
know.
really the point
Yeah.
that I'm trying to make. It's more about like it's not going to be this linear, this beautiful, from obscurity to now we're top 15 consistently every
And
single year.
and
It just
and
doesn't work that way.
and to be fair, the run was basically that it was just everything went perfect,
They
right?
didn't lose
Everything.
for a calendar year, basically. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so
And
that's and they played
and
more than they've ever played in a calendar year. So it's just like you can't. That's not a you can't replicate that. It doesn't. Not even the best year the U.S. will have ever had will resemble that. They're going to have losses against teams that they probably should beat. So it's unrealistic to expect us to be able to sustain that trajectory. Now, I do think you want to put yourself in situations where you can win trophies, which we just took ourselves out of one. But
yeah.
you want to put yourself in situations where you can win hardware to actually validate the growth that's happened, because we don't have anything to show for it other than a World Cup qualification. Not like that's a small deal; it's a huge deal. But I'm saying, you would love to have a Gold Cup. You'd love to have a Nations League, something physical, some physical hardware to validate how much progress has been made over the past 3 or 4 years. And maybe that's coming at some point in the near future.
Yeah.
But we can't be lost on this. I'll let you speak. Sorry,
No,
but
no, I
I
was
know
just
I'm
gonna say I
rambling.
just keep thinking about the and I really like Sid, but just like the whole fluke thing is that, it's not that this isn't a massive disappointment, but it's also not to take anything back from what happened in 2022 and say, oh, well, that was a fluke. We're back to old Canada. We're gonna be
Yeah, I don't like that.
120th. I'm not saying that's what Sid was saying. I just mean in general, it's
Mhm.
not like as though, we're gonna start losing to Martinique all the time and
Yeah,
Guadeloupe. And that's just not the case where we are at with this program. It's just very different. So yeah.
yeah. That's again. That's I even responded to that tweet from Sid because I said I don't think this is like a fair assessment of where we're at or something along those lines, because I don't think it was. I think it was an emotional response, and I can respect that as an emotional person, who sometimes says things that I don't actually mean because it hurts, and sometimes it's a coping mechanism. You can say, man, what the heck are we doing? We suck. It's like, I don't actually think we suck. I think we're really good. But I get people who respond that way, and I think that it was more that than, I mean, you couldn't have watched Canada's World Cup qualifying and thought Canada didn't deserve to qualify for the World Cup. You couldn't have thought that. Yeah. And you also can't watch the team currently, like even yesterday, like you can't watch the team yesterday and say, man, if only we're just not at the level of Jamaica. Like, we can't compete with this team.
They were the better.
They should have won over two legs. They were the better team. There's no doubt about that. It's like they were naive. They made mistakes. They got bit for their mistakes.
And they got
it's not like, and a little unlucky, and handball that I don't know how a referee makes that call in that moment. I don't even want to get into it. I'm surprised we've gone 46 minutes into this podcast and I haven't mentioned it yet. But
no, I will say I saw him point, and everyone in the media room was like, "What? What? How? What?" Like, no one understood. It was so so not obvious or clear. I thought it was maybe offside at first, and then, I mean, that ref was just, I know the Jamaicans were complaining. I get some of their gripes. The Canadians were too. That ref was just the ultimate CONCACAF ref in so many ways. But I think, what are some of maybe the positives, before I let you go, of just not necessarily the performance per se, because obviously it was such a disappointment, but any standouts, players, anything you saw that you liked from the two legs?
I thought Tajon looked really engaged. Both legs, I thought he was dynamic. Richie Larea, I don't know how many times I can possibly have the same discussion about it, but
he's so good.
Always, he just I don't know how he hasn't played at a higher level and gotten consistent run at a higher level, because he's just not an MLS level fullback. He's so much above that level. And so, I hope it works out for him at some point where he can.
Yeah, he made the wrong move at the wrong time, and it
just happened to be. Yeah, it happened to be the wrong move. It happened to be a team that bought 17 other players.
Well, they made the Premier League unexpectedly. They're like mid-table, and then, anyways, but yeah.
Yeah, it was. You're right. The situation was just wrong, and he didn't know that when he signed, and I think he just really wanted to make that jump, and he started. He's not that he's getting up there in age, but he's not a young prospect, so he needed to kind of make that move. At the time he did it, it was like his opportunity to make that move. And so I don't fault him at all, but in hindsight, it ended up being the wrong location. And I think if he ended up, going to Belgium or going to the Netherlands or really any other league in the world, he'd probably still be playing there, or he'd still be playing in Europe. It just happened to be, again, the wrong situation. And I feel for him because the talent's there. There's no doubt about it. He could play at that level. And every time he plays against high-level opponents, I think the same thing. So he was a bright spot. The whole right side, Buchanan, Larea. I thought Larea had a really good 2-game window as well. Shouldn't be lost on, obviously he missed a few chances, especially in the second match. But I thought overall his hold-up play was a game changer for us. And when he was on the pitch, we had trouble holding up the ball. So he was very valuable in that sense. And also, I think he's always been able to help David a little bit, because David just doesn't perform as best as an out-and-out 9. Yeah. And so when he was playing with Laren, I thought they had some good link-ups. There's no doubt it was when we were most dynamic. There were a lot of positives. I mean, like, as much as it feels horrible to lose that way, and it's hard to have positives when you lose that way, to think of them. But when you just think of like the matches themselves for what they were, the chance creation was not a problem across either of the
I think legs. It was 2.8 something to 1.4 the expected goals for Canada yesterday.
Like, we weren't struggling to create chances. It could have been 4 in the first half alone. So we have to look at it for what it was. If Andre Blake doesn't have the best game of his life, like, we're probably in Copa America already, but again, those are the positives. Unfortunately, are things we all kind of already knew. Like, Larea is good. Yeah. David works better with Laren, like better with another, hold up striker. Yeah, we knew that, so it's like there weren't a lot of new learnings, but it's still good to see guys like that perform at the levels that they did. And then, on the other end, there were a lot of concerning things. I think it would have been just fantastic to get a big stop from Borjan across these 2 games. And I commented it on the space yesterday. It's like, feels like we haven't had a big Borjan stop since the Hamilton game against the US. That was the last one we're like, man, he might have just like saved us in this one. He made a big, a big moment in that game. Andre Blick had 4, in the first half. Like, so it's like, it's kind of another thing you're up against is like you have a goalie who's hot, who's just making ridiculous saves. And they, at some point through World Cup qualifying, were getting those saves from Borjan. He was coming up big for them. And it just doesn't feel like we're getting those saves anymore. It's like every good chance is in the net, and they're not goals you can blame him for. They're not, you don't look at him and say, yeah, he should have stopped that Shamar Nicholson breakaway. No, but Blake on the other end was making those saves, and so that's another thing where you're like, do we have a Blake in our player pool? Is it Dane St. Clair? Is it Maxime Crepeau? Like, are these guys at that level where they can make a save and save us a game? Maybe.
I think maybe not to that level, but I think they're an upgrade. I always find watching David, I always really like watching Jonathan David. He always is so smart. It's just weird. I just always feel like there's something missing, but it's not his fault. If that makes any sense. I don't know how best to describe it other than he's almost there, and I don't know what that extra something to be better is, but I really enjoy watching him, and I think he's such a smart, effective player.
I can pinpoint it actually, and there's another thing that came up in yesterday's space, which is I think from a profile perspective, and these are the kind of assessments you're going to need a manager to come in and make. From a profile perspective, neither David or Larin are really strikers who can challenge a goalkeeper from outside of the box. Like neither of them are guys like, I'm going to put my laces through this ball and challenge you. Shamar Nicholson blasted that ball into the net past Borjan. The way he hit that ball, I think Ugo maybe has in him, but I don't know if we have any other profiles, any other striker who has that profile who is just like can really punish a goalkeeper with a powerful shot. David's always been more of a finesse guy. Larin's always more of a finesse guy. They like to find the soft spots in the box. They're 1-touch finishers, 2-touch finishers. They're crafty players, right? Kind of cute and dainty around the box at times. But I don't know if they have that guy who you give him, a few extra yards of space outside the box and he's going to put it into the corner. Like I just don't think they have that guy in their player pool. And it's not just the strikers, by the way. It's even in the midfield. Like you play against some of these teams, but even still, he's not really going to try it. They're always what they're looking for, Canada, when they play, and I think teams have caught on to this, is that they're looking to go play wide and then play across the 6-yard box. That's their style. They love it. They love the wide players. If they can get their advantage to a wide, get to the end line and cut it back to David and Larin, usually to both of them, you have one of them kind of coming to the penalty spot and one of them to the back post. Very difficult to defend. If you get Buchanan and Davies into the right areas, they can do that all day long, and that's where like 80% of our goals come from. It feels very prescriptive. Like it's very much like this is how we score. And then when teams can kind of take that away, then all of a sudden it becomes more difficult to score. So I think again, you talk about somebody coming in and looking at the team and watching a whole bunch of games and seeing what went wrong, and then saying, okay, well, our player profile that we're looking for is X, Y, and Z. Well, what players do we have available that maybe we haven't tried out? Can we move somebody into a different position? This is the sort of stuff that you expect a really high quality national team manager to figure out, and to be able to make on the fly adjustments in a match, like the way Jamaica's manager made yesterday, bringing Bobby Reid into the midfield. Yeah, I thought that was brilliant, and obviously it paid the dividends very early on. So I think you need a manager to be able to do those things and to be able to make those assessments and to say, hey, we do X, Y, and Z really well. How do we pronounce our strengths? How do we sort of minimize our weaknesses? It's things that Herdman did really well in his early days. I think now the tactics have gotten a little bit stale and figured out. So you just need a new, fresh set of eyes to reevaluate the player pool and figure out how to put all the pieces of the puzzle back together. And that's where I think Canada's at.
Well, you just made your pitch to Canada Soccer to be the next head coach of the men's national team. So, Adam Iafrate, I really appreciate this. Thanks so much for doing this. We'll definitely do it again. And yeah, thanks again. And everyone, anything you want to plug for your Twitter or for
if you don't follow me on Twitter yet, it's at Crates of Freights. I try to follow back all the Canadian soccer accounts. So if I haven't, I apologize. If I may have lost you in the shuffle, but certainly I try to. I love the community we've built. The Canadian soccer, fandom that exists, and it actually encourages me so much about the future of soccer in this country, because you see how many people are so passionate about this topic. and it really does make you feel like there's only one way we can head, and it's up. So
Yeah.
definitely, if you don't follow me there, follow me. I'll give you a follow back, and I appreciate you guys.
Well, thank you, Coach. Thanks so much.